All right, it's time for Pops time. Let's do greetings and salutations to all. And folks, it is so awesome. I get to talk to someone I'm a fan of, man. Grim Jim is someone I got to discover through a T-shirt show, and then I'm down the rabbit's hole. Thank you, YouTube. You've sent me down the rabbit's hole, and Jim is quite the Renaissance man. I'm so impressed. Just the amount of different projects and things that you've done over the years, my friend. It's very interesting, and I kind of want to get to that. So thanks for carving out some time and chatting with me.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit late, and
No, we're fine.
I'm gonna keep rubbing my eye because I accidentally got chili in it earlier. So if
Oh
you're
no!
wondering,
Oh man! Yeah, that's
that's
fine. Do what you got to do, man. That's crazy. Yeah, my eyes are so sensitive. I have such terrible allergies. My eyes are always watery and stuff. So I'm always kind of picking at my face and whatever. Trying to be conscious of that in the last couple of years has not been the easiest thing to do. But so let's talk about first your stream and your projects and all that. How did you even remotely end up on YouTube when you have all of this like incredible creative stuff going on? Second to that.
it's a good outlet for drawing attention to other things that you're doing, or at least it used to be. As you as a YouTuber, you know it's gotten more and more difficult over the last few years to get eyeballs and so on you. But it's still a good way to present and advertise what you're doing creatively, and I think being able to be seen and heard helps cut down a little bit on people misunderstanding you. It's a horrible thing to admit as a writer, which is what I primarily am, but there's a lot of room for misinterpretation. Whereas on video, you can see my body language, my gestures, you can hear my tone of voice, and it cuts down a little bit on the chance for misunderstandings. So
Sure.
part of it was that, and a little bit of self therapy as well, to just talk about things that bother me, because I live out in the countryside, and yeah, not much of a social life out in the sticks.
That's awesome, though. I mean, I still work in the city because I lead like a dual life where I go into the city for 3 days or 4 days to actually work, and then we just moved during this pandemic. We moved into and I don't say country because people say you move to the country, you think of like nice green hills and cows grazing. It's all pretty and slopey. No, I moved into the woods. Like the state owns the property behind us for like a mile and a half. Like there's no one going to move in behind us. We have neighbors that you can kind of see on the other side of what part of our forest. Uh,
Yeah,
but I can relate. So that's why I have like no streaming abilities at all on like the days I'm at the farm temporarily because we're still in negotiation with the companies to actually lay some fiber because it doesn't quite go out as far as I am.
yeah.
But yeah, it is definitely a creative outlet. And so then let me back up a little bit. What came first? Was it the writing of a novel, a certain type of book idea? Was it your gaming passions? What was the first thing you're like, you know what? I can't stop the beat that's in my head. I got to put pen to paper on this one.
It was the writing for games.
Hmm.
So I've been playing tabletop role playing games since I was about 6 or 8, and just that's always been a passion to me. Stories around rules and interaction, and because when I started, home computers weren't really up to it,
That's
and
for
there's
sure.
still something magical about the way stories emerge when you make them with your friends and they're constrained by rules, but the options are limitless. You can choose whatever it is that you want to do. So that was always in me, and I either wanted to do that or draw comic books. But the art education thing just didn't pan out for me for a few reasons. And so it was gaming. So I originally published like fanzines and photocopied leaflets and things. Then got some freelance work for a couple of companies, and then started working for myself after the .com bubble burst. And I was out of work for 18 months, and I thought, what the hell?
Wow. You know what? That's awesome though, because the links are in the description, folks. We're going to put some stuff out there for you to connect to Jim and see this. But so I can tell a little bit. I'm gonna have to. I'll call you out a little bit because I can tell by a little bit of the gray that we're not probably too far off base. as the being I was a child of the late '70s and early '80s, and I'm seeing some of this stuff kind of being birthed. And I remember my friends trying to show me one of the first computer games. It's along this lines, and it was on like an Apple IIe, and it was just like it was so primitive and juvenile it couldn't hold my ADD brain. What was like the first stuff you were playing? What were you like? What was it that really kind of caught your eye? And how old were you about whenever this stuff was kind of rolling? Until you mentioned 8 or 9 as being a writer, but what was it?
Yeah, so I was born in '75. So for me, the gaming stuff, the tabletop gaming stuff, was to start with. It was the fighting fantasy game books, the choose your own adventure books.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah. But my dad was originally a maths teacher, and this was before schools had IT departments. So they just kind of said, maths department, you do this newfangled computer stuff.
Yep.
So he would bring early computers home, and we would muck about on them and program things in BASIC and so on. So, but yeah, the computers just weren't quite there for me yet. So tabletop games are what really sort of grabbed my passion early on.
How much graph paper did you have to keep track of back in the day when you were drawing all this stuff? Oh, my friend,
Loads.
just massive
Every
amounts of
birth,
graph paper.
yeah, every birthday or Christmas or grandparent visit, I would get these big jotter pads and lumps of graph paper and pens and pencils. So I'd be doodling dungeons and yeah, plotting out ideas and writing stories and drawing constantly.
I wish I had had a friend like you that would have been able to communicate this a little differently to me because I had more like I was surrounded by people who were players, but there was more like a gap between their creative minds. It never came across to me. It just seemed like a game to do, so it didn't correlate to me as much. And I ended up down the comic book and movie rabbit hole compared
Mm.
to the gaming. Of course, my sons got into it as I was a little bit older later in life, and it's been like a fast forward. And then I feel like a completely out of touch old man where I'm like, yeah, back in the day, there was this book and that book. And they can't understand that this stuff was not widely available. And I don't know, did you live in a city enough where you could at least connect to some of the material that you would need to continue to enjoy your passion?
I basically live in Hobbiton. It's a nice cozy little English village, thatched cottages, all of that out of the way a bit, and I've ended up moving back to my childhood home, so I live in the same place now. So it was a very rural childhood, and then kind of late adolescence and 20s, I moved to more of a town called Basingstoke. Not a very nice town, really, but that was the best thing about Basingstoke is it's easy to leave. It's right on the train line to London, so I
Okay.
spent a hell of a lot of time in the city, and that gave me the opportunity to meet people and network and go to events and conventions and things. And then around '95 or so, everyone got online, and it was
Yeah.
suddenly a lot easier to stay in touch and share ideas and things.
Yeah, it's amazing what happened, right? And again, living through really, I mean, I know there was other stuff, but we all, I think, I don't, was it, I don't know if it was like that for you guys across the pond, but for us, it was AOL. Whether or not you were actually using AOL or not, you could use one of the other services and everything like that. That was like the general term in hindsight of how we all looked at this stuff. But suddenly the world just opened up and there was chat rooms, there was message boards and some websites and surfing, but I mean, it was just like this massive ability to just connect to people just instantly. It was just remarkable to live through all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I started getting online before it was really the internet, using like 2600
Okay.
modems and dialing into
Yeah, yeah.
bulletin boards. So that was different, especially because you were being charged by the minute on your phone line at the time.
Oh man, you don't have to tell me, bro.
So
That was crazy back then, right?
yeah, so you're racking up these bills and typing as fast as you can on these bulletin boards and things, and then that gradually changed as it became obvious that people needed to use up the phone lines. And yeah, you went from 2600 to 56k modems, and all that was super fast, and email lists and Usenet and all of that. And it's been a broadening of horizons ever since.
So now that you rolled out, you mentioned some of your other creative passions, doing the writing that you've been doing, the role playing books, the game tabletop books, that kind of thing. What evolved? How did that? How else did that evolve? Connect my dots there into the YouTube thing. There's still. I mean, you're talking about really getting into this. This is exploding in the mid '90s, and then you've got because YouTube really didn't. I mean, it kind of had like increments of explosion. And you mentioned some of the stuff for the last couple of years, which I think is just absolutely. We're on a curve that I don't think any of us know when it's going to slow down anytime soon because it just seems like it just keeps going. Um, but so how does it evolve for you a little bit more?
Um, so I started the YouTube channel mostly because I wanted to just I felt I could communicate more effectively. Again, like I say, that was a bit
Right.
of a it's a bit of a bad admission. But there is something about body language and tone and the rest of it. And I had things I wanted to comment on and talk about that were going on, and talking to people on at the time email lists and forums. Just some things constantly seemed to get lost in translation. So it was a way to compensate for that, but I didn't really get into it. I know you don't want to go too deep into the topic, but I really picked up my YouTube channel when Gamergate came around, because
Okay.
that touched a lot of nerves for me, and I felt that this was a not exactly a fight, I suppose, but this was something that needed to be talked about and wasn't being talked about, and I
Sure.
felt that I knew a lot of the history of gaming and comics controversies and moral panics and things, and this just seemed like a rerun. So I felt I had a lot to contribute, and so I started producing a lot more content there, and then that gradually broadened out into other things, and then kind of circled back around to more of the game reviews, the media commentary, that sort of thing. After Gamergate finally petered out.
And Jim is selling himself short because he's like got into all sorts of philosophical and religious conversations and interesting analysis. And of course, yeah, like he said, he mentioned because it was literally the same day this D&D update came out, and I'm still not going to be able to delete this bizarre pastel palette colored profile that they're promoting with this all POC writing staff. And I'm like, I was talking to T-shirt and Ironcaster about it. Yeah, Jim just wrote about this. I'm like, I hadn't seen your video yet, and I was like, wow, this is, oh boy, this culture war battle is just like a virus that's just infesting everything. Just it's just everywhere. It's just insane. And you definitely have
Yeah,
been dabbling with so much of that.
yeah. I guess you'd call me a classical leftist, I suppose, or an old school leftist. For me, it's about class and wealth, and this identity politics is a distraction, and it's a peculiarly American distraction. And Americans tend to project their own political outlook on the rest of the world where it's not necessarily applicable. And I think if you have a wider view of the world, you see that a lot of what is considered racism in the
Mm.
States manifests as classism elsewhere. And I think there's a lot of confusion between the two. Like a lot of the negative stereotypes that I've heard, genuine racists come out with, they're negative stereotypes of poor people over here in the UK, and it's like one for one. But we don't have quite the same racial element. Not to say that there isn't racism here, but it's as much directed towards Eastern European immigrants as it is anybody else over here.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, obviously with YouTube, it's created this bridge where you're talking to people from other countries like you and I are now. Whereas with before that was an expensive proposition to use phones before we had massive cell phone use, and even then there was massive cell phone fees with calling someone internationally, and now all of that just
Yeah.
kind of has gone out the window. But now we can at least communicate about some of these things that we didn't really know. But even then, there's still a horrible misrepresentation in the media because if you listen to the American press, it just sounds like racism runs amok, and there's all these extreme stereotypes or whatever. And I always go back to, you mentioned the class thing. For us, I believe it's more of a city versus rural thing. Like it's two completely different
Mm.
cultures, and we try to write a policy that's so broad that many times it creates conflicts with one group over the other group, and that's before you even get to the financial aspects of it. Just culturally, and I always say, and I know this is not pop culture related, folks, but for instance, like a gun control issue in a city is completely different than a gun control issue when you live on a, you know, 35-acre farm in the middle of nowhere where there's a forest that has bears in it. No offense to the, the legislators, but I don't think you can understand both scenarios, and it just gets these broad brush things. And then when you apply that to this global market, like Jim's talking about, now you suddenly have these random swath statements, these high profile political people, and they just spout off about all these stuff. And you're like, well, you're just lumping all sorts of people in the same bucket. And it's incredibly unfair. And it creates just so much, like, not only distraction, but I think it does injustice to us even trying to be, problem solvers and all this. So,
yeah. But
and,
to bring it back to the D&D thing, I think, was it Radiant Citadel? There's
yes.
no actual issue with getting a bunch of people from whatever minority backgrounds or whatever and bringing them together to create something. Great, fine, brilliant. But you can't claim to be anti-racist and then parade the fact that you've excluded certain nationalities or ethnicities from working on your product. It's just base hypocrisy, and I don't know. I just find that offensive isn't the right word. And the trouble with saying someone's a hypocrite is we take that as being automatically bad. But to be a hypocrite, right, you have to be trying to do the right thing, but failing and having a double standard. So, there's a good half to being a hypocrite in that you're trying to do something good. But then there's the bad half, which is that you fail. But to me, looking at that example, the hypocrisy is just so blatant and obvious. I don't know how anyone can look at that and not think, oh, maybe we shouldn't push it using that angle. Maybe we should say something else about it. Maybe we should say, oh, we're trying to showcase all these different spins on culture and these different roots of mythology, and so we got a bunch of people who are native to these different cultures to come together and create this, and make it positive. We've done this for these reasons because this mythology is underserved and you might not be familiar with it, and we think it's brilliant. No white people, woohoo!
Right, and I think we see this. Disney Marvel is probably doing this the worst, right? Because they're just, I think Gary from Nerdrotic says they're casting roles for directors and things like that, and it couldn't be more true, because then when you hear them talk, like Moon Knight, for instance, we have to have an Egyptian this, we have to have someone from the Middle East for that, but it's like they don't have any really creative input as a fan. It's almost like, well, it's just someone random that just fits the checkbox, and it's like, okay, well, that's not the right motivation. It'd be different if you're trying to say, listen, we want to do this character in their native environment. We think Moon Knight in Egypt with this sort of feel and really capture Egypt differently and all of that. And it's just like, yeah, but you're not even including anything. It's just like the label could be changed. And I think that we've had this great sort of like weekly debate now about Halo. Halo is so generic that you could just, if you gave me a week, you probably need less time because you're more of a professional writer than I would ever assess to be. I need a week, and I could transform any of the scripts into any other token science fiction project.
Yeah.
So vanilla and generic. I could just interchange a few things, and it could just be, and we joke that it could be Stargate, it could be Red Dwarf, it could be this, it could be that. It's just so generic. And I think that's kind of, it tends to be the end result of the bad part of what you were saying. Like the good intentions, even if they may have been there, it's completely lost, and we end up with this horrible poisoned byproduct.
And I think it's a combination of design by committee and also the kind of checkbox list. Okay, we need to have a strong independent female character, we need to have a racial minority character, we have to have a gay character, we have to have a trans character. Not thinking about the story and the plot and what moving parts are going to work best, and having your palette be wide open to all of those elements anyway, but picking and choosing the ones that make for a good story. No, you've got to tick all these boxes, and then you just edit it out for China anyway, so...
Right, and that's even more frustrating. I think that's what's really driving people crazy with this new situation with the Harry Potter film. It's like, okay, now it comes out, oh, by the way, you made this big issue, you made this sort of like social commentary that was infused in this project, and then now we find out, oh, well, but it's not for those people. It's like, well, wait a minute, you talk about
Yeah,
being a hypocrite. You start to, I don't know, I think at some point they've lost their benefit of doubt for good intentions, because
yeah,
it's not one thing. It seems to be a cultural thing in Hollywood and these creative packs. And I hate to use such a broad brush, because I know it's not universal, of course, but
yeah.
it definitely is happening at some of these massive corporations and whatever, because it's just insane. It is just insane. So
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're saying, look at us, aren't we so progressive? We're standing up for this important cause, except in China where it'll cost us money.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
where are these much vaunted principles now? The other thing I find about all of this is, I fit into a couple of identity categories. I'm disabled. And I would find it horribly patronizing and insulting to be chosen to work on a project because of my disability. I want to be employed on a project because I'm good at what I do, because I have good ideas, not because I fit into this particular category. I would be insulted and upset
Mm,
if I was chosen to work on something because of that.
sure.
I don't know why more people don't feel that way. I guess you got to respect the hustle, but I don't know. It would stick in my craw.
Yeah, and I think that because of how a lot of the folks are in those situations, they are presenting themselves. So they're not presenting themselves as even being gracious. It becomes like what you're saying. It becomes more about the checkbox, and we see this with. I mean, obviously, I think probably CW may be some of the worst offenders in this category. When we just pick people, next thing you know, that's all they talk about. You're like, don't you have a show to promote? Like, you haven't even mentioned the fact that you have this show. And so there are horrible interviews. I've actually kind of like, I can't keep interviewing CW people. This was about season 5 of Arrow, and of course everything else was crossing over. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. I can't imagine people that have to try to cover Batwoman or something like that. I don't think I
I,
can do it.
I stuck Arrow out. I still like Flash, but
Yeah,
Batgirl's just
I can't do the. I can't do. I can't do. I got through like the first 3 seasons of Flash, and then it just kind of dwindled. My wife was completely lost. She was like, I'm out. And once you lose your spouse, I don't care what nerd you are, it becomes very challenging and difficult to maintain an allegiance and a loyalty to these shows. And speaking of which, we should probably transition to one of the ones that you mentioned that you just recently rebinged, and that triggered me to go back to season 1 and watch Supernatural again. And all I kept thinking was how much I abandoned Supernatural unfairly, and I watched the show Grimm, and it kind of ended up being this amalgam in my head of these sort of great sort of, for lack of a better term, supernatural shows. And what I miss so much, Jim, I miss so much the standalone episode. I could just watch an episode. Like, it was okay for the story to stop and it be a self-contained story. There's an overarching seasonal little plots and threads, which is what makes it smart. But I didn't, it's not now. It's like, oh crap, I got to sit through 5 or 6 hours of a show to watch a show, and it's like, oh my gosh, do I really want to commit that much time to something? And I think this is
yeah,
one of the biggest things that streaming has changed, right?
yeah, because they expect you to binge quite often, so
Mm.
that they'll either you know hand out the episodes one at a time, or they'll dump everything, and you're kind of expected to watch them all, and that is pretty much the optimal way to watch them, because otherwise you're going to forget details and things that happened
Hmm.
that are necessary to understanding the plot. I've been trying to think recently what was the first sort of big series to really do that. The
Abandon
Babylon,
the standalone episodes.
yeah, abandon the standalone episodes. So
Yeah.
I was thinking back. I think Babylon 5 had planned out arcs over its series,
Hmm.
but there were still standalone episodes.
Mm.
But there was a plan. So that may be the start of it, but not in a bad way. So then I'm trying to think, where did it transition to becoming not a positive to have some idea of what was going on overall?
I know it was a really big deal when Netflix first started dropping like their own stuff, and it was like, oh no, all 8 episodes are there, and you're like, what do you mean all
Yeah.
eight? I think the first initial response was what I think that even carried over into like the first season of Stranger Things. I think it was still sort of shocking that the whole season was being dropped. You're like, what? Like, oh no, all of Daredevil is there.
Yeah.
What do you mean? I'm like, no, I have like 13 hours to watch now. What? This is strange. So, but no, I don't think I could put my finger on it. Well, what took you back to Supernatural? Why? What got you back? Listen, I haven't watched this in a while. I need something good, or is there some other motivation?
So during COVID, obviously, my wife's been working at home, so she's kind of taken over the lounge. So I have to work in the bedroom with the smaller TV. So I'm working away, and it gets boring in there. So I just put on something, anything. And I'd only caught a couple of episodes of Supernatural before, here and there, an episode here and there. Like you say, it was standalone, so that wasn't a big issue. And then I thought, oof, there's 15 seasons of this. I can just put that on and have it there playing away while I'm working. But then I got caught up in it. So, yeah, it worked its magic. I mean, it's not a hugely sophisticated show or anything, but it does what it does very well.
No, I mean we could easily switch scripts between Grimm, which came out, I mean, like years later. I don't know if you ever watched you've seen Grimm, right?
Yeah, I've seen
Yeah.
that. I loved that.
Yeah,
How
Grimm's
could I not with
fantastic,
my name?
especially the first couple seasons. Of course, I knew. Obviously, I knew. But and the first season of Grimm is so rewatchable. Like I mean, I know that it peters out and has the longevity issues. Stuff wasn't planned. Writers leave, the creators leave, whatever. Fine, but no, it's the same. It's the same sort of structure, the same sort of episodic storytelling, interesting mystical creatures, and I think. And maybe Grimm is a good sort of experiment to examine, because I think by the time you got to like the season 3 or whatever, they did have more of that. They kind of had standalone episodes, but so much more was threading together, and it was like, I want to go back to the standalone episodes. That's when this was really a
Yeah.
lot more fun. And
Take us back to Monster of the Week.
you making me realize I haven't seen any Supernatural for a really long time, and I watched. I've watched. I wouldn't say I watched every single minute of every episode, but definitely the first 11 to 12 episodes. And it was like a lot of fast forwarding. I'm just my ADD. I've seen this before, but
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. I was like, man, this was fun TV. And I hate that we have to say it that way, but that's what's missing in so much of entertainment is, can I just have fun for a change? Isn't Supernatural just fun for you, Jim? I mean, is it for me?
Yeah, it is fun. But I can't help but sort of examine things, bit more detailed. So a lot of it is, reminiscent of these other supernatural shows, whether it be. I mean, I detected shades of Kolchak the Night Stalker in it, particularly around the angel Castiel. He struck me as a bit of a combination of Kolchak and Columbo much of the time. And it's also a very unapologetically masculine take on the genre, kind of the equal and opposite of Buffy in a lot of ways. I felt. Now, when I was quite small, we used to have reruns of the Dukes of Hazzard play on British television, and it had a lot of the same energy that had as well. Centering around the car, two guys getting into scrapes every week. That sort of thing. So it took me back to that, and even the same sort of formula as the A-Team in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Rolling into town. There's a problem.
Solve the problem. We wrap it up. We keep moving.
Wrap it up. Move on because you're being pursued, or you're breaking the law or whatever. So it was nice to have that, but at the same time, over the course of the seasons, I did feel that Sam and Dean developed as characters in a way that perhaps the older '80s shows, the characters tended to be quite static and didn't change.
Especially for the ones that you mentioned. I think what didn't stay static would probably be more in line with more of the dramatic shows. There's a big separation back there between like an action or a comedy. A-Team and Love Boat. Those are the kind of things.
Yeah.
But then when you have a show like Dynasty, there is Dallas. They would evolve, even though they also had they were threaded together, but you could just watch an episode, or you could skip episodes and not be lost. Like, it was okay to miss Dynasty or Dallas for a week or two. You'd be okay. But you could
Yeah.
definitely tell there's a massive amount of evolution and change, though. TV was just so different. And yeah, it's interesting examining the different eras, too, when you said that, because it made me think about how much you looked forward to watching TV. Like, it's like we take for granted this stuff's just on 24/7. You can just find it somewhere.
Yeah.
I was at work. I listened to a Loki show, and they were talking about Highlander, and I'm like, man, I have not watched Highlander in a while. I didn't have it on my phone, so I just went through all the different apps, and it's for free on this one. I was like, oh, okay, there it is. And I was like, I didn't have to worry about having it with me, and it's like, so we're so spoiled. Whereas, rewind to our childhood, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's almost 8 o'clock. I got to go in. I got to get cleaned up. The shows are going to be on. Pick a night, because that's what was, pick a night. And it was like, you didn't miss shows because it was an event. It was a thing. Now we're just spoiled. Yeah.
And you get these weird associative memories.
Yes.
Because a show was on at a particular time, like Saturday morning cartoons.
Yes.
Or
Sunday night Disney for us.
Yeah. Or a weeknight eating tinned ravioli and watching Robin of Sherwood on the TV.
Right. Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I was just talking about that too, where we had this sort of, I call it the Nexus era. It's like this age 10 to age 25, where we're first experiencing different things. It's music and entertainment, relationships. You're maturing. You're going through puberty. You're experiencing these milestones in your education and in your growth and development. And many times these things overlap, and you're like, well, the first time I snuck into a movie, it was this one. And then I took on my first date was in this one. And the first time I did this was in college. And those things tend to hold almost like extra credit in your love, in your passion for it. You give like bonus points. For me, it's like a movie like Tron. A movie like Tron gets bonus points because it was a special movie at the time. It wasn't, in Jaws. It was like this movie that I saw. I mean, I know it's a classic to everyone else, but I just remember being scared out of my loving mind because I saw it for the first time. I think I was like 6. My aunt took me because she was my babysitter. Wasn't supposed to take me to see it. Took me to see it. I was scared, but I had the reverse response where I was so scared I wanted to see it again. And that's what the association is like. I was able to overcome, in hindsight, as an adult, I understand. I was able to overcome my fear, go face it, grow up a little bit, realize movies are not real. You know what I mean? It's like we have these associations, like you say. Do you think that still exists to some extent? I mean, how do you think that applies now where everything is so 24/7 and ubiquitous?
Yeah, it's something I comment on quite often when I talk with. I have a podcast with a woman called Rachel Haywire, who used to be big in the industrial music scene and the sort of cyberpunk transhumanism movement. And quite often we end up discussing that there aren't really youth movements anymore. There aren't waves. There isn't an equivalent to the punk scene of the late 70s, early 80s. There isn't the equivalent of a goth scene. Kids, which is great in one way but bad in another, they just seem to be able to grab music or fashion like a buffet. There's not these waves, these movements that we used to have. I think maybe the last one there was maybe emo. Okay. That to me is the last readily identifiable youth movement that we've had. So you don't seem to see these same waves and associations and sort of tribal identities in that way. Like I still would identify myself as a goth or an industrialist because I spent those formative years listening to that music, going to the Electric Ballroom in London, all of those things, and dressing a certain way. But I just don't see that anymore. So I think that's missing, and you don't get many of those common cultural experiences either. Maybe the closest thing we've got has been when some Netflix series has gone big, like Stranger Things, perhaps. Everyone watched it, everyone talks about it, but that happens less and less often. There's not there's not the same "Who shot JR" moment.
No, you're
No.
right. I mean, we definitely have lost a lot of those. Like maybe that's the cultural thing again. Like we are always just going. Um, yeah, it's just we were losing that common ground in threads. Ironcaster's out there. He's chimed in. He said that the internet reduced the need for us to go out for that socialization. Couldn't agree more. Maybe that's part of it. We would just, you know, a lefty and a righty could both watch Who Shot JR and have something to talk about on Monday morning. Like it was like a thing.
Yeah.
Like it was cultural stuff was separate, and a Baptist and an atheist didn't care uh, about their differences when they were talking about a sports event. It was just like different
Yeah.
things brought us together, more ubiquitously. Whereas now we tend to be so much more cut off or isolated in some way, which is ironic when we talk about what we were talking about earlier. We're like, well, here we are, you're across, you're 5 hours away, and we're talking, on this little box, and you're like, well,
Well,
so it's weird because we're not. Yeah, it's just it's like this digital replacement of that kind of
well,
bond.
we have this huge big swathe of different people that we can choose to bring into our Dunbar number, our 100 to 150 people that you can directly relate to on a mental level. So the whole world is open to us. So we choose people who are, even unconsciously without thinking about it, we choose people who are more aligned with how we think.
Sure, like-mindedness.
Yeah, and that creates a positive feedback loop, where you're only getting affirmations of what you believe. You're not being challenged on it a lot of the time. And if you want to be challenged, if you want to understand your own thinking and your own positions, you have to go and you have to seek out people who disagree with you, and often they don't want to talk to you. So it's really hard. It takes a lot of work and effort to make that happen. To encounter people who disagree with you, but will talk about it.
True, very true. And I think there's also, and again, this is again to touch on something that we touched upon earlier. It's like because of cancel culture events like Gamergate, it creates fear for certain people to want to put themselves out there. They're like, I don't know that I want to do that. Will my employer find this and now they're going to judge me unfairly because I'm asking this kind of question or that kind of question? Those kinds of things. Ironcaster
Yeah,
added that because everything is connected, that we never truly get away. And there's some truth to that, right? Because I was saying that with my phone, it's like I can always watch Highlander. Like it was right there.
yeah,
Even though I didn't have my digital copy or my physical copy, it only took a few minutes and I could find an app, a service, a streaming service that, or I could just buy it. It would, put it on my phone now. I want, here's
yeah.
$10, put it on my phone.
I,
It's true. And it
I
creates the echo chamber world where I can just pick and choose what I want to do, what I want to watch, what I want to see, expose myself to. And I think that's kind of what you're touching on.
yeah, yeah. There's two sides to this phenomenon. There's the echo chamber, which you construct for yourself, right? Your friends, the friends that stick around, because you've got such a wide open panoply of choices here. You're going to tend to, like I said, without thinking about it, choose people who broadly agree with you. So you end up in this self-reinforcing bubble. But the flip side of that is what I call an echo prison, which is all the people who refuse to talk to you, who won't discuss these issues,
Right.
who, so they're cutting you off from contact with other people with opposing views. So between the two phenomenon, it's really hard to have a debate or a discussion or a conversation even about anything, because it's so low cost. Just go, nah, I don't want to hear that. Click, block.
Don't we? Again, we're a few years apart, but we represent a little bit of an older group in this sort of niche in a lot of ways. I was so shocked, Jim, because I took a big hiatus. I'll be honest. Family stuff gets in the way. Financial stuff gets in the way. I wasn't collecting comic books. I dived back in. I'm doing some more writing again. I was doing this. Next thing you know, all right, let me go on Twitter again. I've already deleted this crap twice. Let me try again. I'll be a little bit more. All I did was maybe ask a question or like or share something of a certain comic book creator, and I'm blocked by that creator. And I'm like, man, something has really dramatically changed. Like it's so bizarre to me that now the ones that I can think of off the top of my head, I don't think I've met personally, but I can't imagine it was so commonplace for me to go to conventions and meet all these people, talk to them, be a part of panels, do different things. But now on social media, I've learned the term Comicsgate adjacent. Evidently, it's I've liked too many people, and because I've liked certain people who are poisonous, I'm not allowed to be followed by that individual anymore.
Yeah,
It's so strange to me. I can't.
it's
It's taken something to get. I don't really spend time thinking about it, but I think it's like I'm identifying people who are saying what you were saying, and I didn't even know that existed like 2 years ago. Like it wasn't to me because all that was happening, but I wasn't plugged into it happening. And now that I am, I'm like, wow, this has been going on a while, and this is way worse than I thought it was.
yeah. I mean, for me, I first noticed this sort of thing happening around 2010, where there seemed to be
Oh my
this.
gosh, wow, that's way before I thought it was happening. Wow, what in
That's when
2010?
I. So in 2007, I think, somewhere around there, I released a pornographic card game based around sort of Japanese hentai. And when I released it, it was a huge joke. You know, it's full of puns, it's stupid, it's over the top. The whole concept of hentai is just funny in a lot of ways. And everyone took it in good spirits and thought it was fun. It sold massively well for me, you know, a small press. Fine and dandy, great. 2010, I started getting weird accusations on the main tabletop gaming forum, RPGNet, of well, I can't really say because I don't want you to get in trouble with YouTube, but yeah, really nasty, over the top accusations that because I had produced a naughty card game, I was
Yeah, you're
somehow
istinophobe, and you've got this issue and that issue,
yeah
and you're miso this and you're this. Oh, I'm well aware of how it spews, but the fact that it was happening to you at 2010, that's even earlier than I even
well
realized. And I'm not saying that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if it was happening to you, Jim, you're not an isolated case. It was happening, but
yeah
it wasn't hitting certain people enough, and it's the small snowball that was starting, and maybe
yeah
there's different snowballs and there's different parts of the mountain where these things were happening, because I think once you got to 15, 16, and you start to see, people in the movie world talk about the Ghostbusters film and this kind of stuff, where you're like, okay, we're radically in a different place where you guys are just hating on people who don't see, because it is just arguably just a really horrible film. Like, it's just a really
yeah
bad film. Forget about the gender switching and all of that. It is just not an entertaining, funny film. But then you start to rewind the clock another 5, 6, 7 years. Man, that's wow. I'm glad you shared that
yeah
with me. That's good for me to know. And again, I
uh,
know that means it's not just you. There's other stories out there that need to be told. To be like, wow, also, what else is happening? Yeah.
yeah. So around the same sort of time, I did make a huge mistake in that I wrote an article defending the use of what Neil Gaiman called icky speech.
Hmm.
Now he was talking about Lolita and Shota hentai comics and things. I was talking about, well, it was meant to be a series of articles, but the first one I wrote was about sexual violence in fiction and how, as a creator, you should be allowed to include sexual violence in your creations, in what you're writing. Again, I will avoid getting you in trouble with YouTube with the title, but it was very provocative,
Sure.
and nobody read past the title because
Got it.
the content of the article itself
Hmm.
was, you know, free speech is important, art is important, art is also subjective, so we need to allow people to be creative, and, you know, if you're writing horror or war fiction or historical fiction about certain events, these things are going to come up and you should be able to write about them. You know, you should have every color in your paint set from which to paint with.
Yeah, agreed.
And it's not anyone's position to tell you you can't do that. That was the content. But no one looked past the title,
Gotcha.
and I was
Firestorm.
excoriated on social media.
Firestorm. Yeah.
Yeah, there were petitions to get me fired from the
Oh
companies I
my
was
gosh.
freelancing for.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was pretty full on.
And just for those of you who maybe know my content, because this is my channel, or maybe you're going to watch this later because it's Jim and you hear his content. This is a self-described leftist who's an atheist, who does atheist content, and I am a self-proclaimed Christian who happens to have gone back to school later in life to become a pastor, and we're both advocating for complete wide open free speech. I think we can agree that I always go back to the movie Mississippi Burning. I don't know if you're familiar with Mississippi Burning. It's this
I
film
haven't
with
seen it in ages, but
Gene
yeah.
Hackman is in it, and there's this violent sexual scene, for lack of not using that term. I am so grateful that I've seen that film. I'm not sure I want to watch it again, but it opened my eyes when I watched it to something I wasn't aware of. And I just didn't, sometimes you just don't put certain things in certain contexts in certain ways. And if we are censoring everyone away from learning and having exposure to those things, shame on us. Shame on
Yeah.
us. We're just creating, you know, such a vanilla world that I don't know. Like, okay, you created your card game. It's probably not for me. Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
That's
What does that
fine.
mean? I don't care. I don't want you handing it out to my kid. Like, okay, but
Yeah.
that's my problem. It's like, you take it away from my kid and go, listen, don't give this to my kid. And by the way, don't take stuff from, that you shouldn't. You're a little too young for that. Like, we'll get to that. We'll have talks about that. But it's like we just can't stop. And you've totally blown my mind. I can't get off of this 2010 type turn because it's way ahead of schedule for me and my timeline of how bad. Because I took more geopolitical firestorm. That was my first wave of the hate on the internet, and this was it was the wars. It was the wars in Middle East and all of that, and it was like I was always articulating, if we're going there and we're laying waste to everything to win and come home, then I'm fine. When it didn't happen that way, I was like, there's no reason to do this. We need to come home. But you
Yeah.
can't have two thoughts at the same time. So that was my first exposure. You're not allowed to say two things. You're not allowed to have both statements.
Yeah.
And I was told, like, oh, you should just move to Afghanistan if you love it so much. And I was told, oh, you do this, you do that, you vote this way. Nobody knows you on the internet. And that's even worse now, because if you don't even put a certain flag on your Twitter page, therefore you're supporting the other person. You're like, what are you talking about? Two things can be
Yeah.
true. And I think what you were saying is, look, I did this. This is not an uncommon thing for artists in the history of art, for the love of Pete.
No.
Why on earth are we changing the rules now? And don't you guys see what a horrible decision this is? I think it's a great
Yeah. And
commentary.
I think for us being older, we've been through it before, right? We've seen this happen before. The Satanic Panic, for example,
Sure.
the PMRC, and the whole attempt to censor rap and metal music.
Comic book
If you
code.
want,
Yeah.
yeah, comic book code, Frederick Wortham. Over here in the UK, there was the panic around video nasties, extreme horror films in the 80s. We've been through it and we've seen it, and typically in the past it has tended to come, I'm sorry to say, from the right, and
Sure.
typically the more extreme religious right. They
Yep.
they see themselves as the moral arbiters of society. And for me as a leftist, it is incredibly disheartening to see it now coming from what at least calls itself the left. We relied on free speech and free expression to get our ideas out there, to create a more liberal social atmosphere. You can't then pull up the ladder behind you and say that nobody else is allowed to express themselves in a particular way. To me, that is a betrayal of fundamental left-wing values. Because to me, it's a liberation ideology. I know some will disagree with me, and we call them tankies, but
I haven't heard that term either. Tankies?
tankies, yeah, the Stalinist left,
Okay.
authoritarian
Okay.
left.
Authoritarian left. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is weird seeing the pendulum move around. Man, we've taken my little pop culture show. We've got all political. I kind of abandoned my political show, and so
Well,
I'm going to jump more into this. But the problem is all this stuff has gotten overlaid. That's why I wanted to focus on this. Is I can't keep pretending that there's not a Venn diagram anymore. I just can't. I'm reading modern comic books. I can't get through them. I'm on page 7 and I have to stop.
I think
It's
this
just-
is more philosophical than political. This is the
It's true.
substrata.
You're right.
to it.
You're right. Yeah. No, you're right. And people are so busy and self-consumed, they don't want to do what you were saying earlier, challenge themselves. They don't want to learn. They want to be spoon-fed certain things. Many people here have been spoon-fed stuff their whole lives in public school, where you're just given some, you're told there's some authoritarian figure in the front of the room that will tell you what you need to know when you go to the bathroom. So they get programmed that way. They go get a boss, and it's the same kind of thing. And they go home, they eat, they take a nap, and they go back and repeat and rinse. Uh, we're
I
asking
was
them
I
to
was
go this.
lucky.
Yeah.
I was lucky with education while I was in secondary education. Yeah, teens. We were doing what's called GCSEs, and at the time that was much more open. It was coursework and sort of self-learning, more focused. They've got rid of that now. Now it's
Mhm.
back to learning by
Right.
rote and everything. But I was lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. You sure were. Ironcaster chiming in to see what he has to say here. He goes, "You'll have to turn the political show into a pop culture show to balance things out." Yeah, well, it's funny because I'd have segments on most of my shows. Even when I would call into a radio show, it was kind of funny. I'd call into one as a guest, and I would give, I'd have about 15 minutes, and the last five or so were always like they always wanted a weird story because I was writing weird news for a certain website, and some sort of movie, pop culture. What movie screening have I seen? Have I seen this or whatever? So it was kind of funny how I'd call into this political show, but literally about a third of my time was spent on pop culture. So, but I think Jim's right. Like, there's again, it's Venn diagrams, right? There's political, there's philosophical, there's entertainment, and um, so much of this stuff is just being crammed into the other. But sadly, we're being told, like you said, pull the ladder up. I'm like, what on earth? So, yeah, yeah. So,
I mean, that's like admitting that your ideas cannot stand up to scrutiny if you're unwilling to have these conversations. I think my ideas do stand up to scrutiny, and if they don't, I want to change and improve them. And it just baffles me that that's not the
yeah,
mindset of more
there's a
people.
again, this may not, I don't, does this translate for you or not, but I know people here will understand. For me, I had said it's my thesis. It's we have people in California and Texas. People in California seem really obsessed with the people in Texas are doing. The Texans don't really care what the California people do as long as they leave them alone. And there's two those two philosophic differences is kind of becoming more at a loggerhead at like the everyday person level. Politically, geopolitically, you mentioned religious leaders. Like, fine, that's happened.
Yeah,
We've lived through this, but now at like the local level, Twitter and social media, like Ironcaster was saying with his comments, it's like everyone's so plugged in, they're picking the fight with the other guy, or the other guy's going, "No, stop it, leave me alone. You're not allowed to talk to my kid. You're not allowed to do this." And it's like, oh, that's where some of this culture war is going. It's like down to like the uneducated layman who doesn't even want to like learn or have the conversation. They block, put up the barriers. They create an echo chamber where they think they're so absolute right. They become more volatile because they've never been challenged on any of their ideas.
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
you've spent a career
there's
doing it.
there's psychological evidence that when you get a bunch of people who broadly agree with each other, they tend to trend towards the more extreme viewpoint.
Sure.
They did this study on Islamic terrorist cells and things, and that's basically how they self-radicalize, is they
Right.
form self-reinforcing groups. And I think we're seeing that on a more societal scale. But I think the clash is a very fundamental one. On the one hand, you've got freedom from, so freedom from hunger, freedom from being homeless, freedom from violence, those things. And on the other side, you've got freedom to, which is the freedom to express yourself, for
Sure.
example. And sometimes those two sets of freedoms are in conflict. So your freedom to own a gun might impact on someone's freedom from violence, for
Correct.
example. You can at least have the debate there, right? But other instances, like my freedom to express myself, doesn't have to affect you at all, right? You don't have to consume the media that I'm putting out if you don't like it. It's not like I'm rubbing it in your face or anything.
But
But it's
even if I'm exposed to it, it doesn't mean I can't live and let live, which is what I try
yeah,
to say. It's like, listen, like for instance, I will go. Listen, I know all of. I'm not the best representation of Christianity because I don't have this sort of like staunch uber isolation from certain things. I'm also not criticizing them for doing that because I don't know their heart and minds and their own spiritual battles and whatever else they're going through. So, for instance, if I go see a rated R film, I'm not telling all of them they should go. I'm just saying I saw it. Please leave me alone. Like, don't
Yeah.
judge me because I'm trying to communicate from a not only from a fan perspective, but from an educational perspective. This is what's in it. This is what the movie's about, or what the content's about, or whatever. And I have to judge for myself what I'm willing to expose myself to, and then of course have the stewardship and the responsibility of exposing others.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is, let's just let me do what I'm doing. Leave me
Yeah.
alone. And I think that's really where that's what the fight is for me. That's where my
Yeah.
libertarian roots are, at
I,
least.
I think, as with most things, it's a balance, right?
Sure, of course.
We should be looking out for each other as a society. We should be protecting each other from harm to a reasonable extent, and for a meaningful definition of harm, because God knows that word gets misused
Yes.
a lot.
Sure.
Right? But equally, we need to have individual freedom as well. So for me, it's about finding the right balancing point, and that's going to be different for different societies, different places, different groups
Sure.
of people.
Sure.
But you don't find it out if you don't discuss. So,
Well, and you have to experience some of that. I mean,
Mm.
I think that the irony is we can call back again where I made a brief mention of Moon Knight and this Egyptian theme and all that. The problem is they've sold everybody short. They had an opportunity here to really showcase a diverse culture that has kind of been still portrayed in a very medieval way, a very not modern way, and they had a very great opportunity to showcase the modernization of this country in this area of the world in a pop culture film and a Marvel film or show. Sorry, not a film, a TV series, and instead it's become a lot of the same old stuff. People walking around in the same kind of headgear and robes, and it's just very generic. I don't know. I think what you're saying is so important and so valuable. Ironcaster's chimed in here. Let's see. It says the battle is getting to every nook and cranny. Amen, brother. Unable to let anything escape its sight. People are losing places and hobbies to be able to enjoy and recharge those mental batteries. Yeah, and I think that's really what it's like. I think what Jim was saying, and he touched on this when he was talking about reflecting on what he went through in 2010. It's like people just don't want to leave well enough alone. And they don't want to be
no.
challenged if something's not right. Like, how dare you say you don't like something that I like? And, it's like all sorts of weird fights that you and I didn't have, man. We didn't have this growing up. It was just, even if there was a lot of disagreements, I don't know. I can't remember things getting so
Yeah.
volatile.
Things only ever got this.
Sports, maybe?
Things only ever really got this vicious over a girl. I think.
Yeah. Physical life things. I could think
Yeah.
there was sports things, like there was volatile stuff in sports. There would be fights at a stadium, or there would be, crazy celebrations gone awry, or things like that. But not on this kind of scale, and definitely not over like the superfluous nonsense that we have now. Like, you just don't like what I like. How dare you say that about this? And you're an ist and a phobe and a whatever for saying, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah.
Wouldn't this energy be better used trying to make some sort of meaningful change? Because God knows we've got a lot of problems. But I don't know. Politically, I feel pretty impotent. It feels like the status quo is so utterly solidified. I don't know if you follow British politics at all, but while we were all in lockdown and social isolation, our government were having parties breaking the law,
Yeah, ours too.
and
Ours too.
a bunch of them just got fined for it, including the Prime Minister. It's
Sure.
the first ever time a British Prime Minister has been found guilty of a crime while in office. He should be out on his ear, and he's clinging on, and it just doesn't feel that there's anything we can do about it.
Yeah, and also your example is just, it's so obvious that this was a violation. Like, it's not like it's some sort of like, because we went through this weird media attack on our leader that turned out to not be 100% true, and it was like, well, okay, that was weird. And then we have lockdowns and everyone's breaking all of the rules. Like, and the amount of governors, mayors, high profile political people who were violating the rules over the last 2 years is insane. It was just, and actually, I live in I jokingly call it the free state of Florida because in the end of May in 2020, there was the George Floyd protests and riots, and at that point, all of Florida said, "Just forget, we're good, we're good, we're good." And then it was like, let's take, because we'd already taken care of. This is a very high elderly population here, so our governor had really high. He spent a lot of resources and attention, even though he got demonized in the media, for focusing on the nursing homes, because we had massive outbreaks in nursing homes. Because once it was in there, it was going to go through the whole population. So there was a lot of resources and energy dealing with our most vulnerable. So after that, we're like, okay, so we've been living free this whole time. Basically, you have the right to wear masks and isolate and do what you want to do. Businesses have the right to have certain rules and restrictions, and everything else has kind of been individual freedom. And it's been a tough balance, and there's been highs and lows, of course, because it's not something that we can 100% control. But I will say that watching, well, hypocrisy, for lack of a better term, it is like you said, it's very helpless. It is very demoralizing. And my wife's really going through that. I joke about the black pill and the white pill. I don't know if you're familiar with those metaphors, but she's been chewing on the black pill. I got to figure out how to get it out of her mouth. She's definitely more in the black pill because she'd been unplugged from a lot of this stuff for most many years. She knows what's going on, but now she's in the weeds, and it's like
that's fucking, it's everywhere. Like
you can't escape it.
No, my wife's into crafting and even like knitting groups online.
The knitting groups are notorious. I've heard about that forever.
It's crazy.
Jace jumps in. I think I'm talking to Jace after you, my friend. So I'll be streaming with Jace. We're going to do a news story one. We're just going to throw up stories and talk. So cool. And Jace is saying hey to everybody and throwing up the faces. So hang in there, Jace. You're next, man. They're coming for you.
Nice to be called handsome.
Well, you got the swagger, Jim. Let's just be honest. You got the swagger. Definitely good PR. That's good. So, we're going to run out of time because now we've ran our hour or so, and I want to be responsible with my time with you. We could probably shoot the S over all sorts of stuff, and we didn't get to comic books. We didn't get to. We chatted a little briefly about the best part of the comic book stuff was you got stuff I don't have, and I was like, I want to learn more. And
we can talk about British comics another time.
Yeah,
Action and 2000 AD and Toxic.
Oh yeah, 2000 AD. Yeah, that's good. But I even looked up because you were talking about you already had a. What is it called again? I'm sorry, Hawk the Slayer, right? You already had it.
Yeah.
I can't even get it till November.
2000 AD did it as separate add-on comics for a couple of months with the Judge Dredd magazine. Okay. So yeah, I got it. It's interesting. I'm not sure quite what I make of it because I love Hawk the Slayer because of how cheesy and kind of gamely crap it is, but it's really enjoyable. And the comic is better than the film in a way that makes it less fun.
Okay. I got you. I can pick that up because we're going to talk about Ironcaster brought it up, and I think T-Shirt's going to have a little stream on Friday. I might be able to pop in for a minute, talk about a 1982 film called Sword and the Sorcerer. And it's kind of the same thing you have just brought up. It's kind of like this beloved cheesiness in the fantasy genre. And it's like if they redid something, they took a lot of those elements away, it would not be the same.
This is another age thing, I think, right? Post Lord of the Rings, there's been some half-decent fantasy films, but before that, it was all cheese. It was all cheese.
But I think we saw this with Game of Thrones, right? The first, because I did not watch Game of Thrones in real time. People are still shocked by that, but I'm like, no. I don't know why, just did not. But I spent like 3 weeks of my life consuming everything, all of it in 3 weeks. And I can tell you this massive change that happens after season 3. Suddenly, it didn't feel like as much of a fantasy thing. The way they handled females, the way they handled relationships, the way they handled some of the violence, some of that, it all dramatically started to change very quickly. By the time you got to the end of the show, I didn't even feel like I was in the same show anymore. And I know, of course, by the time you got season 8, it was just a debacle. I understand. Yeah. And I got to be honest, by the time you got to season 8, there were whole scenes where I was fast forwarding through because I was watching it on my phone. You couldn't even see anything because it's not HD enough. So it was just all black and dark and just sounds. Yeah. And I think what you're saying about the fantasy genre, maybe more so than some of the others, if you take away some of the elements that make it the fantasy genre. It's not. It's just not. It's just nothing. It's not. And I think if you did Sorcerer, you probably couldn't do Sword and the Sorcerer now, and it wouldn't feel like a fantasy thing. It just wouldn't feel. I mean, I know it's cheesy, but it would lose even what made it interesting or fun for the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you couldn't do Krull, I don't think.
Nope. It'd be just as bad or worse as doing Sword and the Sword. A lot of that stuff. This is why Tron didn't work. Tron didn't have anything that felt. They did Tron Legacy, and it didn't feel anything remotely technologically improved. And I think that's what made Tron so amazing in 1982. It felt like, whoa, I'm in a computer. This is computer. Like, this is crazy. And then it's like Tron Legacy. You're like, oh, yeah, okay. No one was impressed. No one was impressed. And I think that was one of the major, it was a very rudimentary story, but there was just nothing interesting or cool about it. So, Jim, all the links to Jim's stuff is down below. It has been so awesome to chat with you, my friend. We will definitely try to connect more often and maybe chat about some other topics and things like that. And folks, he mentioned being challenged, and you will be challenged. Go enjoy some of his content. It's a lot of interesting stuff. Very, very smart conversation, podcasting, YouTube videos, reviews, all sorts of stuff. So, and definitely the kind of person I like to highlight with this is just let people know that YouTube is this massive, broad, and deep world. And it still fascinates me, Jim. I don't know about you, but I still find things. I'm like, didn't know that existed. Didn't know that was on here. Yeah.
Yeah. Rabbit holes. Many rabbit holes.
So. All right, my brother. I won't keep you any longer. Again, thanks for your time, and you continue to be blessed, man. Take care.